sometimes we talk about students taking more control of their own learning and their own education and their own processes. But I think we can't just ask them to do this or tell them that they should do it. I think we need to we create settings of learning and teaching where they feel that it's actually okay for them to do that. And I think this is one of the things that worked really well in this class.
Welcome to this episode of the Unconditional Teaching podcast. Unconditional Teaching is a project by Jessica Koch, Katharina Pietsch, and myself, Tilsi Bucher. Together we write articles and record interviews in which we investigate how we can create healthier relationships in learning and teaching. In this episode, Jessica and I talked to Katharina about a 5-day blog seminar that she taught in February 2020, entitled Confronting the Climate Crisis, a Writer's Room for Cultural Scholars. The goal of the seminar was that each participating student writes a blog post on an issue related to the cultural production and interpretation of the climate crisis. On the first day, students conceptualized their entry. On days 2 and 3, they wrote draft text to then receive peer review and revise and proofread and finalize their drafts so that they could be published on the university website by day 5. You can find a link to the blog in the podcast description. In this first part of our conversation, we talk about the general setup of the writer's room and how Katharina organized the class to enable students to write fast and focused, and also about why both the topic of the climate crisis and the format of a blog worked well for many students.
I've wanted to do this format of a blog seminar called a writer's room for quite a while, because I had the idea at some point that I would like to do the writing that students usually do outside of class in a classroom setting. So usually what you have is, over the course of the semester, you have a class where students get all kinds of input and on a specific topic, and when the class ends, it's basically term break and everyone is supposed to write their term papers, let's say about the topic of the class. And so the class as a community breaks apart, and the only thing that's left is the relationship between the writers and the supervisor. But writing becomes a very isolated thing, and if this relationship isn't working really well or isn't it giving the writers what they need, they are pretty much alone. They're alone in dealing with their topic, and they're also alone in the writing process. And I wanted to try to basically do an experiment with the class format that does things differently, where the writing happens in class and where everyone gets a finished text at the end of 1 week of really highly intensive, focused work. And I called it a writer's room because I'm familiar of this concept, because of friends of Till and mine who are screenwriters, who have worked in writers' rooms. So this is the format where that was invented in the American screenwriting, especially screenwriting industry for TV series. And a lot of the things that I did in this seminar, of course, were different from that. But the idea that writing is not this genius, creative, isolated single mind doing their stuff in their attic with a typewriter and basically nothing else, no social distraction, no interaction with other people. The writer's room is basically the opposite. In the creative industry where it comes from, it means that everyone who's working on the script, on the actual writing of the TV series, works together in one huge office where everyone interacts with one another all the time. I always thought that sounds so amazing, and I would like to either be part of something like this or try to create something like this. So that was the idea. And of course, What we didn't do was working together on a writing project that everyone contributed to, in the sense of we have one single text in the end, because I didn't think it was feasible. But what I wanted instead was that everyone contributes to like a blog, which had a topic, but still individual blog entries that different people write. And also having a blog and blog posts as the result of this class made sense, because I don't think it's really feasible and fair to ask students to write an academic text within 1 week, because writing academic text, so much of that is researching the secondary texts, reading these texts, including them. And I didn't think it would work to do that. But a blog post is different. So it doesn't adhere to all the strict standards of academic writing. Whereas we could still draw on our discipline's knowledge about theoretical perspectives and include those in a blog post. So this was format-wise, these were the things. I wanted this writer's room, and I decided to have these blog posts as the result.
Yeah, I haven't been part of the seminar, but I read the blog entries when they were done, and I spoke to several students afterwards, and they were all like extremely amazed at how well the seminar worked out. And I think that there are 3 different levels that made this seminar work so well. And the first thing is, of course, that it contributes to this idea of a writing intensive curriculum. Immediately by like making the objective of the very class not the transmission of knowledge, but rather the production of a semi-academic, semi-creative sort of output. While in the writing phase, you learn something about the object about which you're writing. Then I think it has something to do with this idea of Wissenschaftskommunikation, that we sort of by not turning or making the Studienleistung an academic text, but rather something that is open for public consumption. I think seminars like this can contribute to this communication of academic and scientific ideas to a larger audience, to a broader public. And that's why I think these blog entries, or anything really that's online and readily available for everybody, really makes a lot of sense. It's something that students can take home, show their friends, show their colleagues, put on social media if they want to, and sort of create, if they like to, a larger community that has access to the output of seminars. And that's, I think, really, really cool. But the idea of the writer's room I find the best in all of that, because it's so, as you pointed out, it's so counterintuitive to German academia. The writer's room is the exact polar opposite of the idea of the Schreibklausur. Yeah. The idea that you have to go into seclusion to write your academic texts, that you need to be alone. And I mean, from experience, we know that the best ideas come up when you talk to your colleagues over coffee, when you are sitting in an office together, or when you meet each other outside and suddenly, you start talking shop, and suddenly, your mind is ready to soak up new ideas and to produce new ideas yourself. And then there's this constant exchange. So this idea that academic work, or any type of intellectual work, is something that you need to do in seclusion in order to produce a viable academic product, is so counterintuitive once you've understood the nature of intellectual work as something that is done within a community. I just enjoy the very idea of the writer's room for academic teaching. I have never thought about this before.
I found actually a cool quote in one of the feedback responses that I got from my students. And someone wrote, sometimes it felt, the setting, she's talking about the setting, it felt like sitting in a writer/journalist's office where we do this writing and publishing thing every week. And this made me so happy, because this was basically what it was. Yeah, what I liked about the idea, that it feels like this productive environment. When she says like sitting in a writer's or journalist's office, I also think what's implicit here is this is not university, and this is not student writing. It's something different. It's something much more professional and much more meaningful.
Yeah, I was basically going to say the same thing. The setting that you chose and the outcome that you proposed to the students made it into something professional. We are going to publish this. This will be on the university website. All your texts will be on there. And within 1 week, we'll get this done together. So you have the communal aspect. It's high stakes writing in a sense, but you have a set outcome. And if students accept that, then obviously many of them got into a kind of flow that makes writing together great. And that is more difficult to achieve when you're a solitary writer.
Yeah, I think it seems to be that students in general thought this type of teaching or this type of doing a seminar was very, very cool. And I wondered, did you have to prep students for such a different didactic approach? Because whenever I try something new in class, it is doomed to fail if I do not sort of let them know that this is different and make people aware that we're trying something that they may not be used to. So how long did this take, if there was any prep involved, and how did this then sort of transition into the structure of the overall seminar?
I did several things actually. So the first one was I had a prep session. And I asked everyone to come there because this is such a different format. And I need to explain to you what you can expect once you set foot in this setting on Monday, February 3rd, I think. I'm not really sure. So it was the first week of February 2020 when I did this. And so I explained the format in the prep session. And some of the rules... I had to deal with an inherent conflict here, because on the one hand, I wanted the writing to be structured, time-wise, space-wise, and also in terms of the strategies that I offered the students to try out and use in their writing processes. On the other hand, I know that writing is a very individual thing, and rarely the two people have the same writing strategies, and the needs of people when they write are usually very different and very diverse. And I wanted to account for that. So on the one hand, I thought it was important that I have a structure for the writing process. On the other hand, I wanted to take into account that by having that structure, it is very likely that some people feel they don't get what they need at all. So this rule I had, which I explained in my syllabus, was whenever you feel that the things we are doing in class don't work for you, you are free to work on your own. You are free to leave the classroom. You are free to leave the whole class setting. And I come back to the spatial setting in a minute. And do your own stuff and come back whenever you like. There's only one exception to this rule: when there is peer feedback or proofreading scheduled, I want you to be here because it doesn't work if everyone is gone. And in terms of preparation beforehand, I think these are the things that I did. The syllabus that explained a bit of the format and the prep session, and I did a preparation in form of the spatial arrangement. I came up with the idea at some point that I need 2 different rooms for this to work, just because there were, I think, 60 people registered for the class, and I expected about 25 to 30 people to actually come to the class. And this was exactly the number of people that then attended. And having 25 to 30 people in one room all the time, where you also want to offer different kinds of writing processes at the same time, I thought this was not going to work. So I wanted a different room, a second room, for people to go where they felt the main room was too noisy, or there were things going on where I, for instance, did some explaining, or people were giving peer feedback in groups and were talking, that it was just too busy and too noisy. And I was really lucky that I could book 2 of these rooms that are opposite one another, and you could see the other room. You could always see what's going on in the other room. So it didn't feel like the class was separated into 2 different rooms or settings. And also it was still like you had one quiet room and one noisy room or something. It worked really, really well. And I think this was probably the most prevalent point in the feedback that I got, that having these two separate rooms in this setup was brilliant. It worked so well. And usually we had like writing phases in the main room, in the bigger room, and everyone who didn't want to participate in this structure could go to the other room and either talk there, or I was in the other room a lot of the time, just to be there for students who wanted individual, like wanted to ask me something, wanted my feedback on their draft or something. Yeah, that was really, really cool. And it was, I was really lucky that I could get this done this way. I don't think this class would have worked as well without this. So it goes to show that the spatial setup of what we do is important.
I mean, there was also another component to this, as if I remember correctly, you had a little tea kitchen set up with a water cooker and tea bags and mugs for students to take a break or to just make it more homely for them to work. I think that was a brilliant idea to make this both more professional, but also like give it a home-like quality so that you have a space that is available for the entire day. In this block seminar format, of course, you have 7 or 8 hours a day of writing, talking about the writing, collaborating, then working on your own. So you structure the day into various phases, but you still have a place to go that is in a sense your place, just by having a couple of coffee mugs and a water boiler there. Yeah. I thought that was really cool.
And that's also something that many people commented on in their feedback. They said it was really cool that you brought tea. I wanted to have coffee, but I didn't have the means, but at least I could bring an electric kettle and some mugs and some tea bags. And also it led to something happening in a classroom setting that I've never experienced before, really. Usually when like I am in the teacher position and I start talking, I am in this, okay, I'm standing in front of you here and everyone else has to defer to me and stop what they are doing, stop talking and so on, and look at me, because this is where the serious stuff starts once I take my position at the front of the classroom, right? But here I had it a couple of times that break was over. I was about to introduce next part of the class, and people were just standing in the corner where the tea stuff were, and were talking or were just waiting for their water to boil. And it was perfectly okay. My impression was they didn't feel like pressured in the same way to now rush back to their seats. They just waited for their water to boil and to get their tea ready. So it was also like it gave permission for a slightly different power relationship, and that's also something that I liked a lot. And also, I think this was one of the tiny things that contributed to students feeling more in control of their own part of the class, because they also felt free, and I gave them the license to do that, to leave any time. Sometimes in the middle of like a unit where I was explaining some things, talking about things or something, or had a like class discussion, a group of people just suddenly left and went to the other room to work there. They didn't ask my permission because I told them they don't need to. So they decided, okay, us 3 people, we like to work together now, go to the other room, give each other feedback on our text. And I liked it a lot, because sometimes we talk about students taking more control of their own learning and their own education and their own processes. But I think we can't just ask them to do this or tell them that they should do it. I think we need to we create settings of learning and teaching where they feel that it is actually okay for them to do that. And I think this is one of the things that worked really well in this class.
Yeah, I mean, it also shows like this only works if students have some sort of intrinsic motivation, but it also shows that intrinsic motivation can be produced by changing the classroom setup. I mean, just from my own experience as a student, the moment I am being given responsibility for my own processes, I feel much more professional. And as Till always points out, feeling professional feels cool. It feels good. And out of that, a lot of motivation can be generated. And if you pair this with a feeling of being comfortable in the environment and creating an environment of trust, for which I think block seminars are a unique opportunity, because it's both a very short time, but it is a lot of time just compressed very, very well. And it lends itself so easily to build relationships, even like working relationships, intellectual relationships, even if they are temporary for these 5 days or however long the block seminar takes. And if you pair this then with the spatial setup that you provided, and this friendly but at the same time professional atmosphere, I think it will automatically lead to more students feeling more motivated to put more work into their own process, simply because the pressure is gone. It's high stakes writing, as Till pointed out, because it is something that is sort of that aims at publication, but at the same time it's low pressure in a sense, and because it's such a friendly atmosphere, and because students can have the feeling that they have control over their own processes, and that's just a cool combination.
One of my ideas for this class was I wanted to be a writer in this class too. So I had planned to also write my own blog post and to go through all the stages and strategies together with everyone else. So that was my plan, that everything I asked the students, the class to do, that I would do myself too. And I kept this up, I think, for Monday and the first part of Tuesday, because the other rule I had was that I would always prioritize the needs of the students over my own writing. So I told them very clearly, I'm trying to do this because I want to be part of this class. I want to be part of the writer's room. I don't want to only be the person who gives the instructions. I also want a text of mine to be on the blog. But whenever you want something from me, this is more important. And it turned out that from Tuesday on, that meant that I didn't get the writing done that I wanted. I'm actually a bit sad about this, because I had a topic, and on Tuesday morning I worked on my line of thought and started writing on the text. But even this attempt at being part of this class in a very different way than teachers usually are already felt really great, because it's not just that I'm also passionate about the topic, but I also realized it allows us as teachers to be part of our classrooms in a different way, in a way that we usually don't get to be, because we are in this discursive position of authority that separates us from the students. And doing the same thing that they do let me, at least for these first few days, be part of the class where I struggled with the same things. I put up my poster with my topic as everyone else did, and so on. And I would still like to try something like that. Make visible what I'm doing, how I work, and to make visible that I don't produce perfect first drafts, for instance, that it takes me a lot of time to do revisions and so on.
I find the concrete procedural elements still fascinating, because 5 days seems like an awfully short time to produce a finished text. How did it, this is one thing that I would be curious in. How the hell did this work? How can this even work? If you tell students, okay, we have 5 days, you have 3 days of writing, right? We're meeting Monday morning, and I'm giving a couple of instructions, and then I tell them, okay, now you sit down and conceptualize. Then you sit down and draft. Then you sit down and finalize. Then you sit down and do peer review. Then you sit down and proofread. Then we publish on Friday. This sounds insane, frankly. How was this even possible in terms of the structure of the days, the process? Because it did work.
Yeah, it did. And it worked much better than I had expected. And also it worked much better than many of the students expected. And speaking of pressure, this was the interesting thing, and I come back to explaining more about the actual structure and what we did. But I think at some point I was almost apologetic about this in front of the class when I was talking about the schedule, where I said, I can imagine that me telling you right now that you will have to finish your text by Friday, that this puts a lot of pressure on you. And also I was very honest, and I told them, if I was sitting in your place right now, I would probably panic, because I am very bad at working under pressure. So if you are a little anxious right now, I can totally understand. So I was very, very sympathetic with them. And it turns out that some people felt like this, at least a little bit. But I think they were at the point where they felt it was working fine, much faster than I was. So in a sense, they trusted the process that I had created more than I myself did. And I got a lot of feedback about the pressure thing. And many said they did not experience any pressure, or at least not in a negative way. I got one feedback that explicitly said that was the first time in a university context where someone experienced positive pressure.
Wow.
So that seemed to have worked really well, that we had a lot of pressure in terms of the fact that this was a goal-oriented class, and in terms of the tight schedule that I had. But it was positive because it was a productive pressure. Everyone was so focused, and by seeing that everyone around you is working on the same stuff that you're working on, and experiencing that either they struggle with the same things you struggle with, or they are working hard and they are writing and they are producing text, all this, I think, contributed to an atmosphere where everyone was focused and productive. And many people in the feedback told me that they did not expect to get as much writing done, and they did not expect to feel as proud of their text in the end as they actually did.
That must have been a really powerful, very empowering experience. I don't think I've ever had the experience that I found like writing empowering, not while doing it. And if you manage to do that in your class, and you apparently did, because like the student voices are very clear here, that's absolutely amazing. I wonder if I could replicate that in one of my classes. I will certainly try. Just because I think this must be a really, really cool experience. Just experiencing yourself as a professional, experiencing yourself as somebody who's in control, experiencing yourself as an accomplished writer, in the process of writing drafts, like acknowledging together with others that you are starting off with a concept, then you have a first draft, a second draft, then you rework stuff, and some things don't work out, and then you tinker with it a bit, and then the outcome makes you feel like, yeah. And I mean, I've read the blog entries. They are super fascinating to read, because you see the different styles, the idiosyncratic voices, the types of arguments, the anecdotal evidence that connects with like scientific discourses and terminology. And that's so cool to see, this mixture between academic writing and creative writing here. And just as a footnote for when it comes to teaching classes like this, it's not just that students feel pressure that they produce something in a seminar and make the seminar work for them, but teachers like us, we also feel the pressure, particularly when we identify very, very strongly with our seminars and with our practices of teaching. So I'm not surprised that you felt that the pressure was on and that your students felt like, okay, we can deal with this. This is absolutely fine.
Just to actually respond to that, because I think it's important to talk about this. When I came home on Monday, because I work when I do my preparation for the next session, I work a lot on the impression and the feeling I have right now about how the last session went. And I came home and I thought, wow, I put so much pressure on this whole situation because of the schedule we have and all that. And I'm asking so much of these people. And it's 1 of 5 days already gone. So we only have 4 days left. And I was a bit nauseous, because I really felt like this is not going to work. How can this ever work. I felt really, really bad on that Monday. And so what I did then on Tuesday, after the second day, I asked, how confident do you feel that you get your draft finished tomorrow? And it was really important for me to know, because I was totally uncertain. Yeah. And everyone was like, yeah, everything's fine. I'm pretty confident. And it was such a huge relief. But I felt a lot of pressure, because I thought, well, this was my idea to ask this much of 30 people. I've never done this before. I have no idea how this can possibly actually work. I asked them to trust me with this, and I have to make it work. And in the first days, this was really hard, and it got better and better by me seeing at the end of each day that basically everyone was doing much better and working much more productively and faster and with much less anxiety than I had expected. So this is in terms of the things that I did: the tea, the 2 separate rooms, the Pomodoro technique, which I will come back to. And the fourth thing is this finishing flashlight round that I did at the end of every day. These are probably the 4 most important things that I did in this class. At the end of every of the 5 days, I asked every student in the room to very briefly tell me what they need for the next day, for instance. And I think because every single person told me something at the end of the day about how it was going for them, that I actually figured out what was going on in the class. It was not like only spotlights on individual persons, but for everyone. I got a good picture for everyone. And also I knew, because I asked them for what they needed for the next day, what the next day needed to look like. So it wasn't like I had devised a strict schedule, but I tweaked and adapted every single day anew for the needs of the students. And I think this is why it worked so well. So coming back to two things I think that I should introduce at this point. One is talking about a bit more about the structure of the blog sessions, and the second is actually the topic, because like in the very beginning I said I wanted to do this writer's room thing, and I thought about a lot of different topics that could work with that. But then 2019 happened, and it seems such a long time ago right now in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. But only a year ago, the climate crisis was actually the biggest thing on the table. And I thought I need to do something with this topic. Sadly, it's not represented in the context, in the university context that I know, where I work, at all. I got feedback from some students who said this is the very first time that we encounter this topic in any educational setting. So we're really glad that you're doing something about this. So this became the topic of my class. But as we are not climatologists, we can't do the usual natural sciences stuff about the climate crisis that other disciplines do. So what I wanted to do was have a look at it from a cultural studies perspective, because if our premise is that we are an important discipline because we look at how language and metaphors and stories and the way our culture represents things, how these things are important in the sense that they really shape the way we think about stuff and also we act about stuff, and stuff in this thing being a situation that will change life on this planet within this century massively, and that could lead to the extinction of not just our species but thousands of others too. And it's not straightforward to most people that this has relevance when you compare it to the work that climatologists do. The people that on the one hand research the actual destruction that is going on and propose technology-based and also policy-based solutions to it. And this was basically the question. And I didn't, when I framed the question in the course commentary and in my syllabus, I didn't provide any answers to it. I said, well, I believe that the fundamental premises that we have about the word, that language and representation and metaphors and stories, that they matter immensely. And I believe this must apply to this issue of the climate crisis too. And so this is what my blog became then, my idea to write a climate crisis blog where we use a cultural studies perspective to look at representation of climate crisis and analyze how the way we represent it, how the way we talk about it, the stories we tell about it, the imagery we use, how this contributes to either actually changes that we see being made, being underway, or the reasons why there haven't been many significant changes yet. And one of the most useful perspectives, I think, is from a sadly very marginal discipline called ecolinguistics, where people talk about the stories we die by. They analyze how the stories we tell ourselves about, for instance, how growth and progress is important to our civilization, how the conquest of nature is basically the only conceivable relationship that we humans have, how those are what they call stories to die by, because they say it's not really the things we just do that brought us in this really dire situation, but it is actually the underlying stories, because these stories are what provides us with the ideology and the reasons and the frameworks to do these things. And this is what's so hard to change. Our behavior is not what's really hard to change, because, I mean, and we've had the perfect example of this in March 2020, where within only a couple of days, literally, the whole world changed their behavior on a grand scale in order to do something about this fucking pandemic. So we are able to change our behavior, but changing the stories that inform this behavior in the first place, this is actually the hard stuff. And I think this is why what we do, and from our cultural studies perspective, is so important. So this is what this class was about, right?
Awesome.
Applause,
Yeah.
applause.
I mean, this is the stroke of genius, I think, using a blog post format and not an academic writing format. I mean, the blog posts are sometimes analytical, but oftentimes they are also very personal. Most of them are overtly political. Seeing students exercise their language in this kind of format was, to me, a powerful thing to see. And I'm struggling to frame this overtly as an academic exercise. But then, of course, it is, because we develop a toolbox of semiotic analysis which enables us to do this kind of writing in the first place, to take up everyday issues, look at them, and dissect how language works, and then wield language ourselves to make intelligent points about how the world is framed, as you said. And I mean, we mustn't forget that many of our students will never work in academia. This is not the career they will choose. That's not something they aspire to. But many of them will keep writing throughout their lives. So it's part of our academic education that we owe them to practice different writing skills, to practice different styles, to practice different registers. And if we make this into an exercise that gives them a sense of agency and empowerment, as you said, Jessica, then this is the best that university can offer these young scholars, I think.
Yeah, it was really cool to see that many of the students said they are not really familiar with the blog post genre. And in the beginning, some were really unsure about what kind of text is this. It's different from academic texts, and I'm more familiar with academic texts. So we collected this in class. And the thing that stood out basically is that it allows for a lot of different types of text. Actually, it can be journalistic, can be scientific, can be very personal. And many people then opted, for instance, to start or and end their text with a story about themselves or about someone else. Many chose to use very direct reader address, which I liked a lot, and I thought it worked very well. And the cool thing is that every single one of these texts works really well for what it wants to be. I think they work within the genre really well. So it turned out not to be hard for people to learn to write in this genre very, very quickly. But this is usually not how at university we think or we approach learning and teaching a new text genre. Usually we approach it with a lot of rules, especially if it's about academic text. So I think it takes people a long, long time until they feel they have some kind of freedom within this text genre. And for the blog post, I think people got there within 2 or 3 days. And I think it was also due to my emphasizing constantly, see, this is a genre and I picked it deliberately because of that. That gives you a lot of freedom. Use this freedom. Be creative. Write in the way that you like, that feels comfortable to you. Make use of the freedom this text genre gives you. And I think this also helped a lot, yeah.
Thanks for listening. Unconditional Teaching is a project by Jessica Koch, Katharina Pietsch, and myself, Till Zibuche. Music by Lily Olason. If you want to know more about our project and our partners, check out unconditional-teaching.com. If you like our content or would like to engage with us, head over to our comment sections or contact us via email, team@unconditional-teaching.com.